Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's a long agenda, although hopefully we can keep moving right through it. All right, so we will begin with just debriefing on Wednesday's meeting. Any thoughts from folks, just impressions of that, immediate thoughts coming off of it? Don't be shy. I was actually impressed. Well, I guess it was a lot of folks from our funding and governance subcommittee who attended, but it was better attended than I thought it might have been, which was interesting. I don't know if we delivered exactly what folks were expecting, but that was interesting. Namdi, you unmuted.
I just wanted to, I thought that, I think a lot of the groups who were on the call are also looking to figure things out in regards to settlement. So everyone's trying to figure out who and what. So I think a lot of that participation was that where individuals, especially the districts and the other organizations, stakeholders, everyone's trying to figure it out. So I think that we were like a step in that direction, and individuals realize everyone knows it's needed. So I for us to be a part of it, it makes sense, and just trying to figure out how do we do it, you know, in a way that, I mean, to do it and do it right. I mean, it's going to take some work. I mean, it's not as cut and dry as everyone thinks that it's going to be. I think it's going to entail some true work, and individuals having a vested interest and to stay committed through the process. I mean, it's not just like you do it now and it's over. It's going to have to be continued. And I think that's what individuals are trying to figure out, who and what organization is going to do that, what body is going to come together to form that. So I think it was good, but I think it also shows some of the challenges that are before us if we pick up that mantle or whoever. So that's
Yeah, I agree. I was glad that we sort of put our flag in the ground, though I don't know if folks thought we might do that in a more specific manner, but I think certainly making it clear that we were going to dedicate some of our capacity to this, I think was overall positive. I don't know how received by those who didn't necessarily speak up, but yeah, no, I was pretty pleased. So I guess well, I don't want to interrupt if anyone else has any thoughts or feedback before we talk about next steps, kind of based on what was actually discussed in the meeting. Anyone else have any observations or concerns? See Eugene signing on. Okay. So basically, I mean, we committed to establishing a subgroup that would be dedicated to, coming up with a plan to pursue this particular issue. There was of course, some talk, and I know Dawn and Tika are on about how, how that would interact with other existing work groups, should they continue to operate, and things like that. But my impression was that we came to the conclusion, kind of, I think, kicked off by Dan Shelton, of assembling a subgroup dedicated to looking at the settlement and how do we develop recommendations in response to it for the legislature, as essentially a subgroup of funding and governance. That was the conclusion that I was hearing. Did anyone else really hear anything else? I just want to make sure that I got that right. I know there are others who think there should be a separate and fourth working group. So I wanted to not ignore that. It just didn't seem to dominate in the discussions that we were having. People seemed pretty okay with this idea of it being, a subsection of funding and governance. So I'd love to hear thoughts, concerns on that. I mean, that can be staff concerns about capacity. That can be, anyone's thoughts in terms of just the complexity of managing these mounting subgroups. I would just love to kind of hash that out a little bit more and make sure that we actually know how this is going to work.
I think for me, and this is Tika, it didn't, it really didn't matter so much whether it was a whole separate work group or if
Mhm.
it was a subgroup of another committee, but just that there was a dedicated group of folks that were focusing on it.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I think Dan's idea of it being a subgroup under funding and government makes sense, especially because it has to do with the governance piece. The folks that weren't as particularly enthused about that idea, maybe they felt because they were already in a committee that then they couldn't be a part. But to me, I think you could still be a part. You could
Yeah.
join that from wherever. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that was their apprehension to that thought or not.
I think that's a good point. Noelle really voiced that first. I think sort of like, well, you know, in the educators work group, we've already got these recommendations, which are very aligned, we think, with that recruitment and retention piece, right?
Mhm.
They do. Would it make sense to maybe, if we do have a subgroup, have somebody from each of the other groups,
Mhm.
that liaison? I could kind of see, like, kind of as you were saying, Tika,
Yes.
like just having some group that makes sure we're overseeing, but also not duplicating efforts. I think that's the biggest thing, so.
I would
Right.
definitely, this is Dawn, I would definitely want to participate because of the two areas that impact early childhood. So
Mhm.
looking at ECAP and then also, and Tika and I have talked quite a bit about this, you know, the K to 3, because of our work with CESPAC, and we're both members of CESPAC, and I'm not a GACEC member, Tika is, but I do attend some of the meetings. So looking at that alignment of birth through 21 and looking at best practices, single systems. And so looking at including preschool in the unit funding
Mhm.
in that ask. And I have a question, and I'm not sure, well, I'm just going to ask it. So, you know, there it feels like there are two camps. There's a camp that is okay to stay with unit funding, and there's the camp that is not okay with stay with unit funding and really wants to advocate for a whole new system. And I'm not sure how to even say this. And
Go for it.
so I would say that there's a more, there are people who are more fiscally conservative or who are probably more comfortable staying with the current system because it's like the devil, you know, maybe. So how do we objectively, if I say there are certain people in different committees that are more in favor of staying with the current system, and there are certain people who are not in favor of staying with the current system. So I would propose that with the settlement, we look at the unit funding recommendations as a bridge, or as it's a short term, maybe fix to what we know needs to happen, or our goal of the overhaul of the funding system. And is there, if we have the settlement group reside within one subcommittee, if that subcommittee has more members who would prefer to see things stay the way they are, is that really a fair way to address the funding?
Yeah, I totally hear what you're coming from.
I hope that everyone's understanding what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do. And does anyone have any questions about Dawn saying? Yeah, we want to make sure that we have a balance of stakeholders represented so that we have a fair brokering of this conversation, especially on the long-term funding, you know, formula reform conversation. We don't want to be skewing it one way or another. In my opinion, I don't want to see it skewed either way. I want to make sure that we're bringing in folks from, I guess you could say, either camp. And I think we need people who aren't with a camp.
Sure.
And just have expertise in other areas, or, you know, whether it's community expertise or just other elements of expertise.
There are national experts who
Mhm.
could come and speak to the whole consortium, who
Mhm.
this is what they do. They look
Yeah.
at public school funding. I mean, that's their expertise. So having them, and has the consortium had, and if they have, forgive me, has the consortium had national experts?
No, well, And to that point, I would say we also have local groups.
Sure.
You could say fall into either camp, or maybe they're also trying to broker something, between the camps, who have done some of those things already and have materials and have resources that they could bring to our table also. So, I mean, I think it's kind of like where we started, I think, with the redistricting conversation, in my view, which is, what do we have locally that's kind of on the table on this topic? And sort of, take stock of that and start from there and sort of know what's already being proposed here. And then what are, like, I guess, essentially the gaps in our knowledge that we can work with our team to fill in, and then help guide us through a process of, like, all right, there are options out there. We have to understand these options. We have to understand, where this could take us, and help us start to get to the place where we actually have a proposal where we're like, well, this seems like the best place to end up. I think, I thought it was interesting. Chuck Longfellow sort of spoke to it, because that's always been on our long-term timeline. And I think he spoke to, like, really the urgency and I think the interest of everybody involved to see that conversation ramp up and be happening simultaneously to other things that might need to be happening. So I think that's also important to think about. I'll stop for a second. I have more thoughts sort of functionally that I want to get to in terms of our next steps, but I want to leave space for others to comment on what you said, Dawn.
Casey, may I add a comment?
Yes, please.
So just without any disagreeing with anything that's been said, the fact is we're dealing with a matter of law, and that will go to the General Assembly and be acted upon, either become the law or end up back in the courts. And that's immediate and that's direct, and that will happen within months. And the question is, if it becomes law, then what is it we would recommend that's congruent with it? This is not taking a position on whether that's sufficient in any way. I see Dawn nodding, and I hope you are, because I'm not, because I haven't, if you remember, the recommendations here from the commissions were always that this was a stepping stone to a structural change. So it seems to me it doesn't have to be either or. That's my only point. But the one's immediate, and then the other is what do we do to accelerate those changes going forward?
Right. And I think on Tuesday we talked a little bit about, there are kind of, and Matt, I know you're on here, maybe you can say this more eloquently than I can. There's not all of the provisions of the settlement are the immediate pieces, right? There's different sort of staggered timelines for meeting those settlement requirements.
Years.
Right. Say that again.
It's going to take years.
Yes.
Before it's fully implemented, even
the settlement terms.
Yep.
And so it's a matter of, right.
I think it's like the next 3 years.
Yep.
For everything to get initiated. And so I think what the job of this working group would be is to really to master this. What are these timelines? What needs to get done when in relationship to what needs to be delivered? Because there's some things that need to be delivered immediately this session, where if we are offering recommendations related to things that need to be happening immediately this session, we need to make sure that's where we are focused. And if there's things related to, like, the full overhaul of the reform of the funding formula, may or may not be something where we need to be putting all of our capacity within the next 3 months. But again, I think that's the settlement committee. That's not me saying I'm making a decision on that. I think that's why we need the settlement committee immediately to be figuring out that timing.
When we're
Mhm.
looking at that too, so we have our timeline of, when recommendations are due or different deadlines, but we don't have action steps actually point out. So, okay, we need to have this. And part of it, I guess I'll go to when we talked about engagement too, but we need to have this done before we can get to this piece. And and how do we know that we're there? So almost like progress monitoring along the way of this project, to know that we are meeting our deliverables in the end if we're not checking our action steps along the way.
Mm-hmm. So anybody else have any thoughts on that? I think our next step is identifying who's going to be leading this working group subcommittee. It would be an important first step. It sounds like, you know, we need to look at, we can look within funding and governance, within the consortium, certainly. And then work with those identified leadership folks to decide who's going to be, who populate that group, because they really we need to, I would think, begin to pull that together sooner rather than later. I mean, and we can talk now, we can talk about timing. I know we're rushing towards our December finish line for our recommendations. So are we saying, okay, we're going to start to put those pieces together so that we can hit the ground once we have closed that loop? What are some of your thoughts on
question?
capacity wise? Go ahead, Haley.
So we were talking originally about it being a subgroup of the funding and governance group. So in my head, that's just like on paper, all of the funding and governance members, and then you take a subgroup of those, and that's the group dealing with it. And then people who are interested or other work group members can join, but they're not technically on the subgroup. I'm not saying that that's how it should work, but that's in my head how that phrasing sounds.
Right.
Like if you make it a subgroup.
That it filters through that work group, essentially.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's how it should be, but
no, I think it's an important point, because I think there's pros and cons to that. Like, I think there are cons, I guess, which could be seen as being, you know, the limitations of the scope of that work group and its membership. And to me, the pros are that our working groups have more of a nimbleness in terms of the timing of how frequently they meet. I feel, I mean, and I don't know, maybe there's other pros and cons. So, I mean, I think as we consider it functioning in that way, as opposed to a completely separate new work group, that's something to think about. Obviously, a new work group can meet as often and however it wants, but it answers to, in terms of sort of checking in with a broader group, it answers to the full consortium, which is obviously a longer timeline.
I think another possible con could be that that work group has some other heavy items on their plate right now, and even the composition of that group versus like the educators group that is coming off of making their recommendations.
Yeah. Haley, do you think there's a meaningful difference between forming a sort of an expanded subgroup within a work group, doing this versus doing a new and separate work group in terms of staff capacity needed to assist? Do you think there's a meaningful difference between those two configurations?
I mean, maybe more lift on the front end of starting a new work group, but either way, it's gonna take capacity, because it's gonna end up functioning as, especially if it's a subgroup, are they gonna meet at the same time as the, like, it's just.
No,
I
don't know.
My
guess would be no.
What? Sorry.
My guess would be it wouldn't. It would be there'd be separate meeting. I don't know. Nnamdi, what do you think when you picture this?
Yeah, I was definitely thinking not meeting at the same time, thinking separate. I mean, and I guess in my very optimistic, joyful, everything works out the way it's supposed to world, I'm thinking that we have, you know, potentially ask one of our CFOs, because I know they have that vested interest, if they would be willing to help us corral this group of individuals and just work with us. I think that they can help pull members, and then we can maybe extend membership to other outside group and educational stakeholders who we know are interested in that topic, and they would work. And it wouldn't necessarily move us or derail our funding work group or us moving back to governance. It wouldn't, but so they're not they're a part of this subgroup, but we're kind of separating them in a way that gives them the just freedom to work within our parameters, but also gives them a little freedom to do what they feel needs to be done. And they're connected to us. I think that the biggest thing is having that connection to us, because ultimately this has to go back to the General Assembly, and they know that connection to the General Assembly. So I think that individuals would want to be a part of this subgroup. So that's the way I was viewing it. Not so much that it would be our group necessarily funding and governance doing it, but a part, maybe some membership with others from the outside.
Would it
Yeah.
also make sense to engage some of the other folks that are part of it? So I know Tizzy and I are members of DEO, but some of those other members to participate as well.
Yeah, I think also
Or
in
maybe
terms,
some of,
Yeah, go ahead,
sorry, or maybe even some of the other people that gave testimony. So like I gave testimony, Bill also. So I'm sure Bill would be very excited and being part of this because he adds so much to the advocating already for these same things around the state. But that might be also some folks to engage alongside our already members that we're pulling over, whether they're from funding and governance or another subcommittee.
right. Well, and I think we have to remember too, this group is going to, is sort of shepherding the whole response. So, I mean, in my mind, there's ways that it's not necessarily that this group is doing all the work, but again, we know there's instances where it's like, well, this piece kind of belongs in educators if educators is continuing to work, and sort of liaising to make sure that they're working on that as opposed to duplicating efforts and doing a whole new effort. Again, we know that funding and governance as a work group has formula reform on its list. Does the settlement group now take that over, or does it interact with the larger group to sort of influence what they're doing in terms of timing? I mean, I think these are the initial types of things that this work group even has to figure out sort of strategically. How does it make most sense? I don't know if it makes most sense for that group of people to do all the things versus coordinating that all the things are happening in other spaces, if more appropriate, just to make sure that all gets done, if that makes sense.
Does it make maybe more sense to like in each of the work groups, like at any of the work group meetings, just make sure there's a piece of the agenda where they're talking about settlement, something about the settlement or alignment, or like, I don't know. I'm getting so scared of forming another group just from capacity. I think it would be awesome, but I don't know how it would work.
Well, I think that's important to talk about because I'm worried about that too.
I'm right there with you, trying to think through how to get it off.
I can't picture going to more night meetings and planning more things. Like I get worried that things would drop in quality because it's just, I have no idea how, there's so much behind planning that goes into those meetings to make
so
effective.
We touched a little bit about on this on Wednesday, but there's always been this sort of specter of, all right, we revisit these working groups and their path forward. And there's always been this sort of tacit thing where it's like, well, educators is maybe at its finish line. I mean, do we think that's really where we're going to end up? That educators is we've been working on this the longest of any work group. We've got our deliverables set, or do they feel like they need to continue to monitor? I mean, is that something that full consortium can do without the existence of an active work group taking that capacity? Food for thought there. Because I think if there's not capacity needed to continue to facilitate a work group that has completed its recommendations, that it's now the responsibility of the full consortium to advance, is that capacity that can be utilized otherwise?
Right. And it could be that they're, Fran, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Fran, sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just, Kelly and I have actually been, talking prior to this meeting, not talking, but emailing back and forth. And so I think the answer to that question remains unknown at this point. And it remains unknown because we need to set up a meeting with Jimmy Simmons, because the question becomes, who's going to be responsible for implementation of the work group plans? DOE has the capacity and can do it without support from the Reading team. That means that there's resources available. If DOE can't do it on its own and has to have the support of the UD team, then that's a different story.
Right. Well-
Kelly, you can chime in there. I don't know what you think.
I mean, I guess I wonder, we'd have to have a conversation about what does that support look like? I think it's okay if there's something that's being implemented by the department that, and we're not necessarily managing it, but as a consortium, we have a responsibility to hold ourselves accountable for monitoring that it's actually happening. And so what does that look like, reports at our meetings? So we ensure that things are rolling, or or is that sort of that day-to-day management of a work group? I think those are very different approaches.
Right. I think
One
if
may
we're,
make more sense than the other.
and this is just me thinking like the process is just seeing, I think of having a couple people and having like reports, here's where it's going, here's what's going on. I don't know if a whole work group needs to oversee everything. But I can be persuaded otherwise. And Matt, you have your hand up.
What if it's like an ad hoc? And
Right,
just
but
have some dedicated folks
Like a
that
call.
all
want
of
to
these are supposed to be
concentrate on-
ad hocs though, really. We're not supposed to have standing committees. We're supposed to be
Well, that's
focused on
true.
deliverables.
It
But I
could just
guess
be
I
a
was
different group.
I guess I was thinking, but maybe it would become too disjointed if people were just able to move, like there were the leaders of the group, but the other members were able to move. So like how you were just saying with the educators group, some of them may want to stay and continue to move that forward or monitor it. So the folks that were there that wanted that option would stay. And then the others that felt like I've contributed what I can to this, let me move over here and contributed what I can. Or would that seem maybe too disjointed? I don't know.
So could I just chime in on,
Please.
as far as the educator working group goes, I think that in their report, they actually indicated that they had a number of other recommendations that they wanted to follow up on in the future that they were just tabling temporarily because they wanted to laser in on these two in the short term. But I think that they would not want to be dissolved, because they don't feel like their work is done, and also B, one of their two recommendations as far as creating these professional development communities at particular schools. It's a very, I still am not completely sure exactly what they're envisioning, but they are, I think, envisioning something that is very specific in terms of what it would look like. And I think that they would want to be monitored. If we were lucky enough to actually have that happen, they would want to be keeping an eye on what it actually looks like. Because I think that the point of their recommendation was that, that the content and amount of the professional development is sort of what makes it different from what's going on right now. So I do not think that they would that they envision themselves as being done or I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but
Yeah.
I think they would want to continue for both of those reasons. And I've already had more than my say on the settlement and what it means for us, but I don't, just at the risk of being a broken record, I think it's a great thing that I do not think impacts much of what we are doing in the short term. And if we have limited capacity to staff and monitor things, that would, monitoring the settlement, at least, in the short term, would be lower on my list of priorities than trying to make sure that we had solid follow-up on the things that, we're actively engaged in.
Yeah.
I see Ray has her hand up, I think.
Go ahead, Ray.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I just wanted to agree with Matt. I think we need to stay the course in getting prepared to have some solid recommendations and strategies for how we're going to mobilize to advance those recommendations. We have under 60 days to do so. I do think that adding a work group or a subcommittee of an existing work group is something that we can do consider if you want to move forward with that at another time. I think that that now is not the time to do that. And I do think that so as not to consume too much time for the planning discussions, but if there are aspects related to the settlement that emerge, you may consider placing it on the agenda at these planning meetings where you have your leads of the various work groups and your co-chairs represented. I just don't think that we should add another work group at this time.
Right.
And I do have a question though. Is the funding governance work group, is part of that work plan to make recommendations around to change and bring into the 21st century the current unit count funding system? Is that a part of that group's charge?
Yes, Namdi, you can answer that, but there's a work plan. It's in there.
Yeah, I would say more directly, I think that it's just in terms of the funding that's needed to meet the needs of our students. So if we wanted to not in particular look at the unit count system, but I think it was more of a system-wide assessment in trying to figure out how the needs of our students can be met. I think a part of our work, to me, I see the importance of trying to in some way connect to the settlement. I see it because this is, I mean, timely. And as we're speaking of our recommendations, I think in this next General Assembly session, putting all of the systems in place and the meat on this skeleton that's been presented in this in settlement document, it's a lot of work and it's happening. And I know individuals are wanting to be a part of it. I don't see a structured way unless a group is created that enables that information to come to be a part of that process. That's why I think we should be careful. And even if we're not necessarily creating a separate subgroup, even if we just willingly hosted meetings of these stakeholders who want to have that input and involvement so that we can get that information forward. I think that may be a way that we are connected. I know on the House side, we've created our own ad hoc committee to deal with the settlement. So I know information can be funneled that way. And I just think that we have to have a way in which we assist that process in ensuring that all of the information that comes from these financial stakeholders about ways to change this financial system can be included in what needs to be done as far as this playing forward. I don't see a direct way right now that happens, and that's what is leading me to say, how can we be involved in it?
Okay, thank you. That's much more clear to me while we're thinking about that. That's much more clear to me to give a so the Reading Consortium has an avenue to get the input and from stakeholders. I heard you say that. Yes. Loud and clear. Yes. And yeah, okay.
And
so if there are some forums that are created that are more listening forums at that time, at this time, do we lose out if the structure is not clear between now and December?
If the structure of a new working body?
However the consortium organizes itself to meet the goals that Namdi just, or meet the needs that Namdi just laid out.
I don't think so, Sister Ray. I think we could at least start the process, and even if it's after the start of the year to formalize it, I think that may be beneficial. But I just think that at least it needs to be structured. I wouldn't say that it's mandatory before the end of December.
Right. I agree. I think the question there is we have work that we are currently doing that should not be interrupted, and there's not a good reason to interrupt what we're doing over the next 60 days. I think we have a natural pivot point after that in terms of how we do this structurally and how we address pulling in,
Right.
you know, an additional to deciding who the point people are and how they're going to operate.
Right, right. And I don't want to suggest that it, to me, the work is interrupted. It's all related and interrelated work, and it's intersections in the work. But we have a limited amount of time to shape these recommendations up and have them ready and to be
Mhm.
clear about how we're going to drive them forward.
Mm.
So it's about timing for me, not about a level, a lack of importance.
I agree with what Namdi said. Like I can see both the pros and the cons from either side about moving forward and staying focused on what we already have. But with this huge piece coming in, I think if we don't acknowledge it, so many people are looking to engage it, we're going to miss the momentum opportunity.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, and we have an ad hoc working group in the Senate as well, and you know, and leadership from our education committees who are specifically looking for recommendations from Reading. So we need to be in a position to make those clearly, but I think, you know, with or even without the official and formal formation of a group within the next 60 days, I think we could still identify leadership in terms of, you know, beginning to envision our approach to the settlement. And we have members who've been very vocal on that. Aaron Bass, for example, was really the first person who even vocalized the need for a dedicated effort on the settlement. So I think we'd be remiss not to think of him as a potential leader on this. And then, you know, I would assume we would, as we always do, have two folks leading. And usually we work with those folks who've been identified to lead an effort and work with them to envision what that looks like moving forward. So my suggestion would be an Aaron. I know, Namdi, you mentioned CFOs as a potential, although we might want them both individuals to be members of the consortium, the official consortium body.
I think Aaron is a great suggestion.
I agree. I
Thank
agree.
you.
And he said it, and I often, when I suggest things, get put on the spot to do them. Then, so I think we should bring that back to him.
I think he knows that. I think he knows. Yes. And so I mean, obviously he's not here. We'd have to talk to him about being, but I know that he monitors the stuff very closely. And I think he would absolutely step up to the plate and bring that into our planning space and all these places where we want to make sure that we're talking about this even before maybe we've got a clear work plan. I think that would be appropriate, and we can think about, you know, an appropriate balancing partner for him who would do the same.
And as we move it forward as well, just the appropriate size of the group to make sure that it is manageable for the two of them, but also for whomever is supporting it. And that there's a core group, but then others join in or add pieces as we go. Outreach as well, like with sessions and the hearing what people are saying.
Right.
Kind of thinking of it maybe a little differently than your traditional work.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think the point people are important to start with, because I think we work with them to come up with that stuff. I don't think we should necessarily be over extending ourselves in this moment to envision everything that's going to happen, because we have to work with those people to figure out what is the appropriate timing, what is the appropriate scope, and all of this kind of stuff. How does it interact with the entire consortium and other existing subcommittees? So yeah, for me, the next step is identifying that leadership, and I personally would nominate Aaron Bass should he choose to accept it. And I think we should identify one other person, which I'm willing to, you know, if anyone has thoughts on how to balance there.
I think this for another time because we can move on.
Yeah.
But But I was just gonna say, another thing that we could think about just in terms of capacity over the next few months, or like when we really want to ramp this up, is engaging more with DSU and just like, you
Mhm.
know,
For
if the
capacity.
IPA team is maxed out, can we find support some other DSU folks
I
to
think that's a
help with
great.
this work? And that's more of like a Kelly budget question, but
Sure.
yeah.
Jason,
No, that's
we have
totally
some of
fair.
that built in, so
Mhm.
it's just up to Jason and I to help figure that out.
Are you
Okay.
able to get grad students to assist too? Like, would that play a part in trying to budget that?
And we've got them,
I
right?
think so. I will let Kelly answer. I think
Yeah.
so.
We
Do you
have
want to talk through
students
that a
built
little
in.
bit? What that
Like
looks
maybe
like?
that
Kelly?
could help. Maybe that could help build capacity some.
So right now, and Jason, please jump in. I mean, on the IPA side, we have 2 or 3 grad students behind the scenes helping with the work groups right now. And I know Jason built in some on his end as well. We're just trying to get that up and going.
How about public allies?
Well,
You know, we're always fans.
we might already have plans for them.
Okay,
Yeah.
And I have some plans for them too.
just a thought.
It's always a thought, Dawn.
Ray, is your hand raised again, or was it raised from before?
It's raised again.
Okay.
I have a quick question. I don't want to lose what Nomni called out or lifted up when I asked him the question earlier. Do we have definitive dates and discussion prompts for listening sessions for the general community?
Not yet. Tika, are you point on that or right?
I had
Well,
that on
if
here
you make
to
it
talk
to
through
number
today.
3.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll take that as our cue. So I feel like for number 1, we had a lot to say. Our next step is to talk to Aaron and think about a potential working partner for him as point person on settlement planning. All
Matt's
right.
hand still raised, or Matt, is that from prior? Sorry, I just see one more up, so.
Before we move on from number 1,
His hand, yeah.
Matt, did you have something on number 1?
No, my hand, that's an old one for me.
Okay, so follow up, those seem pretty self-explanatory, right? Did you want to speak to that at all, Haley or Kelly? I know we are planning to have, and that's sort of where educators' recommendations are overlapping with some Rodel efforts. So a meeting was going to be set with Paul.
Noelle's working on that connection, but also just from, so you all know, a lot of the work that the educators did, we did look at what other groups are doing. So that has been a foundation for the work. And I think moving it forward as well is figuring out how to get all of them to work together,
Great.
not duplicate the efforts. But we are looking at that and we'll follow up with Paul.
Okay. Any questions on number 2? Before we move on to the engagement piece to answer Ray's question. Okay. All right. So we're on the outreach plan and Tika's leadership on our outreach and engagement and listening sessions and such. So Tika.
Sure. So this kind of came a little organically, and I guess to Ray's question about the listening sessions, I'm not aware of any, so maybe there were some already planned, but excuse me, that's what just kind of got me up to bringing some of these things to light. And then also earlier in this conversation, when I mentioned that we have this timeline, but actually breaking down like with the listening session. So by this point, we would have listening sessions. By this point, we would do that so that we are monitoring to know that we are on track to deliver our deliverables at the time in which we say we're going to deliver them. So I'm open to working on trying to hash that out as well. Some thoughts that I had as far as community engagement are really outside of just the general ways we've engaged in community in the past. So with town halls, with listening sessions, with literature drops. So I envision all of those things, but also bringing new avenues too. So for instance, last Friday, we were on a call with some folks from from Baltimore that had worked from the Family League of Delaware, but they had worked with the Kirwan Commission on advancing their work. And they had suggested that some of the things they did were even TikTok videos, as far as getting outreach and education and pieces like that. So we have another call next week to kind of talk through some of this, but that's sort of what I was envisioning as far as in community engagement. So the traditional roles, as well as, excuse me, these new avenues. And you've heard me speak before about engaging just smaller groups of people. And that for me, I really envision everybody being a part of that to whatever their own capacity is. But I think too often we put things out and we wait for folks to come to us, or we say, oh, this was posted. I think this is so important that we need to come to you and we need to be in your face and not wait for you to come to us or even understand how to come to us or how to engage. So that brings it to the second part of what my vision is. So there would be the education piece of just how education works in general, or even when we were talking about school boards, and that with the referendum bill, people's voice is through the school board. So educating people on what some of that is. I envisioned the education piece being the first kickoff, and then coming with a second layer behind that once we've discussed more with this bill and what we want that to look like, and focus on that piece. The education after we got it kicked off, Dawn, is where I said I'd like public allies to help us. So I actually do have a call this afternoon with their program manager over at TSP, but looking at conversations to have with them about incorporating the allies to then take over the education piece and can continue to educate the community and stemming back to us. So I think that would help to build capacity. I'm always looking for avenues to build capacity. So just tying into those networks, but I look at it more as a grassroots thing, like everybody is involved in some capacity.
Well, and that's, for those of you who aren't Public Allies alum like Tika, Namdi, and I, TSP is Team Service Projects. It's a natural part that's already built into their already funded framework of work. And they train public allies on asset-based community development, which obviously is very relevant to this, exactly what we're attempting to accomplish. So just wanted to add those footnotes, Tika.
That's helpful for those of us who don't know.
Yeah, we don't speak public ally.
Yes.
Any questions? I guess, I mean, we did want to do, we had talked about having a singular town hall or multiple. I feel like, you know, given just timing and just what all that's going on for me, I would think doing a singular listening session town hall makes the most sense if that's something we really want to push to do. Because a town hall is really only successful when we're able to get folks to show up and speak to us. If we feel like we need to do, I mean, we do, I thought we made it pretty clear early on that we wanted to be able to have people really understand the recommendations we are making right now, not the settlement, not what's coming next, what's coming in December. So we probably, if that's what we're committed to, I think we should set a date. And
Namdi can talk to this more if he wants to, but we've been talking about having town halls specifically for the referendum reform information and push, possibly in each county, like devoted to each county.
in the new year or before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have to
Good.
be
Yeah.
talk about.
Next
Yeah.
week.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah,
We actually have our meeting.
Tomorrow.
We actually have a meeting coming up this next week, right? Am I right,
Monday.
Haley? We have a meeting on Tuesday to discuss some of the
Monday.
efforts that Monday, thank you. Let me put that in. Let me put that in. But
make sure I don't forget. But yeah, so we have a meeting on Monday just to talk about, because Tuesday's the election. That's what it is. But yes, we have a meeting on Monday to talk about possible next steps. Because a lot of this, whether it's some of the issues that we've spoken of earlier, that Ms. Ray brought up around the connecting with people and town halls, or whether it's just the work that's being done around referendum reform, or like there's a wide array of issues that we need to start bringing more people and educating more people about as we move forward. So this is going to be, I feel like this is actually one of the, not the harder parts, but just it's going to be, we have to communicate and get out there, get information out there to community members. And I think there's something that's going to be really important.
Yeah, I think it is the hardest part. I think that's why it's always been a stumbling block for prior efforts. And I think I'm proud that we're leaning into it, but we have to really keep leaning because it's hard to do it. It's so easy not to do it and be like, but our meetings are public and anyone can come. It's so easy not to do it. And even when we try to be more transparent and more accessible, still not do like what Tika's describing and really go all the way to meet people where they are. My proposal would still be, I think we at least need to have sort of a kickoff, I suppose, of some kind prior to our December meeting to make sure that we're giving people an opportunity to engage with our proposals, and maybe to, at that point, to signal more such engagement is coming in the new year, would be my suggestion. And since it's almost November now, and so much of November is going to be kind of eaten by holiday.
So like a mid-November town hall kind of thing.
I mean,
So-
if we're going to try to beat Thanksgiving and do it before Thanksgiving, then we really need to pick that time immediately and start to advertise it if we think people are going to show up for it.
So we have to do it the week of like the 16th. Because I think that following week.
It would, yeah. It would have to either be that week or we'd have to be looking at the week after Thanksgiving. And I don't know. I mean, my goal would be if we're going to do this and we're going to do one, we just need to do it with enough lead time to draw folks in to actually look at what we're doing, or else we're just kind of just going through the motions.
Right. And we want the town hall to get new people. Because like, I think we've been getting a lot of attendees at our meetings, which is awesome. But I think if we did a town hall, you would want it to like, I don't know, maybe attract some other people that haven't been as tuned in. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a town hall, I think I'm excited about the idea, but we have to think about it logistically too. Like, does each work group get a half an hour to like talk about in depth what their recommendations are, or is it more hearing from, like, I guess I'm confused on exactly how we want to let them know, but we don't want to talk the whole time either.
Exactly. It's hard.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of detail, especially with like educators, and referendum reform is complicated.
But we do have the advantage of recorded meetings. I mean, we can say,
yeah,
before you come to this and tell us what you think, please watch this meeting that we have posted right here. I mean, there are things, once we have our YouTube stuff all together, it's right there. That's a pretty accessible way to watch the presentations that have already been made on the proposals.
Right.
Could we also set up maybe a Google Doc or something somewhere where the community could start posting their questions or things they would like heard ahead of time?
We have done that prior. I know, do we have an existing form, don't we? Or no, I guess that's kind of gone defunct. We had a form where people could subscribe to the mailing list. This was WEIC era.
Well, I'm also thinking too, because I've had people ask me questions at different times after meetings, if there's like a place where people can just like pose questions, like questions at readingconsortium.com, or, something where they can just always like engage, that we can then, either email back to them, or it's something that we, say it's something that a lot of people have sent messages about. We then make that an agenda item, but something where like we have a better temperature of engagement on community.
And we have done that in the past. Haley, I think you were in charge of monitoring it. Was it onerous? Okay, we will not conflict on the 23rd. We will definitely not.
Honestly, I didn't do too much of that. That was even before me. with
Okay.
Rick.
Okay.
I didn't
I mean-
do a lot of monitoring that.
I mean, I know there's ways to do this. I mean, whether it's, you know, sort of a thing that's linked through Facebook and or the website. I don't know how difficult that is to do. My concern is more back end monitoring of what comes in and making sure that it's not just a black hole where people
Right.
put things in and never get a response.
Right.
If there's a grad student that can make sure that things are being, you know, I guess we'd have to think through logistically what that is. I think it's a great idea. I just want to make sure that we're doing it and it doesn't just become another way to be non-responsive, or not that we have other ways of non-responsiveness, but you know what I mean? I just don't want it to be a non-responsive extra thing that we don't have time to do properly is my concern. But you know, I mean, I guess I'm sort of picturing on websites when you see those little contact boxes or feedback, suggestion, whatever boxes. We don't
Right,
get a
'cause
lot
some-
of like messages on Facebook. Certainly people can just message the page on Facebook. Kayla, do you get, I'm a host too, so I would see it also. We
Yeah.
don't get a lot of messages there, but like Haley and I would see it if people sent us a message to the Facebook page or posted to the Facebook page. That is one recourse that exists.
Well, I even think about it too, like we could post it as a slide at the end of our meetings, like for further engagement with the Reading Consortium, or if you have questions or blah, 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 email at this address.
Right.
And then it could like sit there for a few minutes at the end, because I think I've had conversations with people that have attended and not attended. And
Yeah.
sometimes they think of things after the meeting
Sure.
or want more explanation about something, or they've heard things in the meeting and they're like, are there minutes or something posted?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, usually we
I'm
post
okay
Haley's
with it.
address, which maybe is the best strategy. I don't, so that's the thing. I mean, it's like Haley keeps on rolling back to you, but I don't know if you want us to be continuing to post your address as opposed to something more of an inbox, open inbox.
well, could we get like a general one or whatever, and then like Haley or other people can be checking it
Yeah.
or addressing it? And I did tell Haley that I'm open to, you know, helping assist with that, because that's what I think a lot of these things it cannot be one person
No.
or just a few people. Like it takes teams.
Right.
of
Well, it
people.
makes sense as
And
part of the public engagement piece, actually, if you want to work on that. I know we had a generic Gmail email for WEIC. I don't know if that is named in a way that makes, I feel like it was like Wilmington Schools or something.
Yeah, I think I used that to create the YouTube. So I think it
Mhm. It still exists.
It's Solutions for Delaware Schools,
I
isn't it?
think it is. It's
Yeah.
something like that. So I mean, we have a generic Gmail email.
Okay.
That could
I think
be-
it's just, I agree, Tika, that like it would have to be a team, but sometimes if there's not one person doing it, it doesn't get
Mhm.
done. You know what I mean? Or like
Yeah.
a point person.
Yes.
I agree.
Mhm.
I don't think
but
I can be that person. I think I might drop dead. But
No, you're doing so much. You're doing a lot.
and I don't mean to keep, everyone is doing a lot. I'm not the only person. You all are doing 8 million things, but it's just for this thing in particular.
Yeah, but you do a lot. You're our administrative backbone, and that's a lot. No, I mean it's true.
And more, yes.
More.
And more. She's doing research too.
And more. And
Uh-huh.
more.
But Haley, we can talk some more outside of this to not take up all our meeting time for that, about
Yeah.
ways for those things too. And
Yeah.
anything I suggest, I'm open to talking more at any time about, not to take up everyone's time.
All right, thank you, Tika. Well, I'm just going to put another vote in that we try to select a town hall date like today, if we can, just sort of identify it. I think we're looking at 2 hours in an evening. And, you know, if we can just get like a save the date out there, I think we can figure out how it flows. I don't think we should be planning to make an hour and a half of presentations in a meeting. I think we need to just do a high level and to engage people and hear their questions, hear their comments, hear their concerns, and just, let them let out whatever they want. It may be relevant very specifically to our recommendations we're confirming. It may be going in a different direction. That's just good for us to hear from them. But I do think we need to set that date and do that. We've been talking about it for a while, so we should put our money where our mouth is. And I'm willing to work through text or however we want to do it to try to ID a date. It wouldn't be something that we'd expect the entire consortium to attend, but I think as we saw last Tuesday, we did sort of an impromptu meeting and we had pretty good engagement. So let's see if we can do that again. Okay.
Do you want to throw some dates out, or do we want to start it up via text to Z? I actually have
Let's
to,
start it via text if we can.
Okay.
We're at 11:30 and I want to respect everybody's time and keep moving. Do we have any, I guess the only work group that has met since last week, so the only one we might want to hear from would be social determinants. Any highlights from the Thursday meeting that we should know?
I can give a short version if you want. The group met last night, and we've had 3 separate groups of members trying to put together some more detailed proposals to ultimately put together into a recommendation for the consortium at its December meeting. And those groups actually spent a little more than half of last night's meeting separately meeting and discussing narrowing each of their recommendations down to 2 priority recommendations that they then came back and reported to the larger working group. So I think that that group is well on course to providing some pretty specific and detailed recommendations to the full consortium at its December meeting with some numbers attached to them. And just tying that back to what you were just saying, I think that Jason knows, I don't have it in front of me when the social determinants November working group meeting is, but I would suggest that whatever sort of public forum we have occur between that meeting and the consortium meeting, because it won't be until the November social determinants working group meeting that there is actually a concrete, specific set of recommendations with dollar amounts associated with them. And I would want that to be done before we put it out and ask people to offer comments on it.
And that meeting is November the 30th.
November 30th.
Yeah, so maybe if we could have the public meeting sometime,
First week of December.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But I think things are in very good shape, and all 3 groups had some very thoughtful recommendations, and I think that we're going to have some thoughtful and specific things to recommend to the consortium, to hopefully in turn recommend to the governor and to you, Senator Lockman, the General Assembly.
Right. My only question on that, I guess, is if we push it back to the first week of December, we're really just, it really is just sort of a very much a listening session. There's not necessarily much opportunity if we wanted to incorporate any feedback we hear into recommendations. Do we see that as potentially being problematic? So if we did it before Thanksgiving, we might hear things that then subsequently could be addressed. As opposed to if we do it, I guess it would be the week before our full consortium meeting. There wouldn't be a lot of room to adjust proposals if that was something we felt that we wanted to be open to. Just wanted to.
Yeah, either. I mean, we could do that. My only, I guess, my only concern is just I don't know how quickly these groups are going to be able to go back and put something together that would be something for people to comment on. And
Okay.
I would just want to be sure if we're setting a date that we're actually confident that there's going to be something that we can put out there, and that folks will be able to that'll be detailed enough that folks could actually respond to and offer criticisms or comments.
Okay. John, you're nodding. Did you want to?
That's exactly what I'm thinking about how we can, we were able to talk last night about our priorities, but to Matt's point, to be able to share something with a larger, stakeholder group, we would want to make sure that it is easy to understand and the ideas are finalized. There's a sweet spot of having the information in a certain format prior. I don't know. I don't want to speak for the other groups as to when that would work.
I gotcha.
This is Ray. I think that for the listening session, that sharing of proposed recommendations and inviting and encouraging feedback, I think it's going to be, I think that people will ask more questions because they're just going to be hearing about it, many of them for the first time. And embedded in the questions that people ask, it's that's often useful to make the recommendations more clear. But I don't know if there would be sweeping changes proposed.
Right.
I think that's unlikely.
Sure, I agree.
Mhm. Now, how people line up, whether they're in favor or opposed, is another matter. But the recommendations themselves, they cover the gamut of what this Reading Consortium has been working on. I think the challenge is to articulate them in a way that's understandable, not filled with jargon, not overly complex.
Mm-hmm.
And then people will give their input. And if there's something that's really, really, even the first week in December, if there's a thread of what might be a prioritization consideration that has not been considered, then I think I think that you all are bright enough to be able to see how to, if not incorporate it for the December rollout, to figure out how to incorporate it, down the line. I mean, this is not a one and done kind of work.
Correct. Okay, so I'm hearing consensus around first week of December. I popped at 2 sets of dates in there, but I'm feeling like December 1, 2, 3. That's the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of that week. Maybe our possibilities. Sorry.
So December 2nd is a date that has been slated for the leadership of the social determinants group, including the small work group leads, to put our policy and touches on our recommendations. But Matt, you speak up, and Dawn, if you choose that date, then I think that we have to be flexible and get another date.
Flexible for the social determinants group needs to be flexible, or?
Yes.
Or we could just go with the 3rd and call it a day.
Yeah, I think our group could change its date if that was necessary.
That also would mean we have 3 Reading meetings that week, because there's the 30th and then the 2nd and then the 3rd.
For the social determinants group.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot.
All Reading all week.
I know you want to. Let's see.
I actually had 3 this week, but but yeah.
That's why I'm
might be a
opposed to adding another group. Matt, Tizzy, you proposed, Senator Lockman, you proposed December 3rd.
I just put those down as the first 3, eligible evenings in December. So the 1st, the 2nd, or the 3rd. I can put holds on any of those. I have not compared that to public calendars and know if there's anything else major happening those days, but just as options where we can see, are these free enough that we could gather people to us for a couple of hours or an hour and a half, or however we decide to do it.
So you want us to just hold those for now until you check other calendars?
Yeah, I think we would have to have the team check the calendars and make sure there's no other major stuff going on. I mean, I'm sure there will be something, but just something that is enough, gives us enough leeway to get the, the stakeholders that we want to make sure are coming to us to engage. And I do like that it gives us more time to let people know about it and to sort of pump it up and follow Tika's lead and get people to know what's happening and want to engage. I see. Okay. Funding and governance is meeting on the 3rd as of now also. And our full body meeting is on the 10th.
So what's open, the 1st?
Looks right now like the 1st is the open day.
Well,
Is it when, as in, I don't see social determinants on our calendar for the 2nd yet.
we just set the date last night.
The 30th.
But
Okay.
both Matt and I said that we can be flexible. So
Okay.
if you got to go with the December 2nd, then we'll change.
Okay. I mean, and I think, I know Namdi's sort of multitasking. I don't know if Eugene knows if it's problematic for us to go before their meeting on the 3rd, but we can work that out kind of offline. You don't think so, Haley?
I don't think it would be a problem.
Okay.
And we
So
think
let's, Mhm.
the first week in December is just more doable to get like the most people to attend versus like the week before Thanksgiving. So like the 16th. Is that just coming up too quickly to be
It is, I agree.
feasible?
So we can focus on that. I mean, and then, yes, it means a lot of Reading that week, but it's because we're working towards our final meeting of the year. Wrap it up, go to the holidays.
And I will add, UD employees are furloughed starting November 1st, all staff. I know that we put in a possible request for exemption for us to work on this contract, but we don't know if it's going to get approved.
Right.
And we were asked to take furlough days on the November 23rd, 24th, and 25th. We don't necessarily have to take those days, but that was what was suggested to us. And we're not supposed to, we won't get paid. We're not supposed to work on those days, you know? So that's just a little wrinkle if like to prep for that next week, you know? But we can figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right, we have a tentative date that we will work to fully realize.
And we said December 2nd.
Yeah.
Okay. And has the 5 to 7 time frame been working for people? Do we want to?
Seems to. Anyone think otherwise? Okay. Other than that, okay, we're at 11:45. I think otherwise we are good. I think our public comment is in the chat from Amy Solomon. Anyone else like to give a verbal public comment at this time? Okay. All is quiet. And Amy's comment speaks to the need for us to get public buy-in as a body that will push equity forward to completion. And speak to this in the context of the town hall and so on and so forth. Essentially just that there's very committed activists that just don't really believe us or probably, you know, any such body is going to actually deliver. So we need to do more work to change their minds. All right.
Senator Lockman, I was on the agenda. Can I just give a quick?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Really quickly, the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity and Policy will do a public launch on November 23rd. We essentially will be talking about who we are, what our priorities are, and we will have a guest. It's going to place us within a national context. Mark Morial, the CEO of the National Urban League, will be joining us. We have 2 invited speakers that I will, share once I get a confirmation. It's going to be a broad brush stroke on not only the center and what we're driving towards, but what is equity and what isn't equity. Jay Street is an invited person to speak in a broader context. Because we have the National Urban League Affiliate Partnership, it's going to place this center within a national context. And then we will also share how people can get engaged, how they can access resources, online resources that we're developing in terms of research, webinars, pre-recorded webinars, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to ask you all if you could just mark your calendars and join us.
What time?
Likely, Eugene, likely no earlier than 5:30.
Okay, great.
And 75 minutes. We're trying to follow Zoom norms.
Okay.
I have people on for, a long time.
No earlier than 5:30 or no later than 5:30?
No earlier than 5:30.
I know, I'll just add as a note that the House's ad hoc settlement committee is meeting that night.
What was the date again, Ray?
What group is, Tizzy?
There's a House committee meeting that night, which on my calendar, I have it as 4 to 6. So just as an FYI.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. That's great to know.
What was that date again, please?
November 23rd.
All right.
And as a part of that launch, we're rolling out a series of dates and topics for community conversations. And we're starting our community conversations with who's in the room. Very often we talk about the technical aspects and the challenges, but people in the community don't know necessarily about people's backgrounds, some of their lived experiences and what drives their value system. So we're going to start our community conversation that way.
Okay.
That's awesome, Ray. Do you have a flyer or something that you could send and I can have it put in our newsletter too? And if you don't have it ready now, I can have them just put like a save the date for November 23rd.
Okay, I'll send you something.
Okay, and then I can share on Facebook too whenever you guys are ready as well.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
All right, I think we covered a lot. Everybody feel good? Thank you. All right, have a great rest of your day and weekend and stay warm. It's gonna be cold. And we'll see you all next week multiple times, I'm sure.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.